don't think anyone was fully ready for this. Least of all, Lando Norris himself. I've said it before and I'll say it again, he's been looking at the wrong rival. His real rival is the guy on the other side of the garage looking back at him and just going, hello. I've warned this before. If McLaren mishandles their papaya rules, we could see a full-blown driver rebellion. Oscar and Lando asserting different ways of control and both wanting to claim McLaren as their team. Because I can imagine that both of them are equally annoyed at the likes of Zach Brown and Andrea Stella of just dilly-dallying and letting their own paranoia about what could happen on the track get in the way of their own championship efforts. They're in this together in a way. And again, I'm really seeing Senna-Prost vibes here. Because Lando built this team as it is right now, and he's managed to fend off some really notable names in the sport, it's almost like Prost versus Lauda, and we saw Norris with Ricciardo. But then in comes this new guy and starts to make their own claim, and you're not sure what to do. This time around, I wish to discuss the men more, not just the team side of things. I get why Lando may be feeling this way right now, that he might feel like he's being challenged, but right now, at this very moment, you feel like something is really going down right now at McLaren. Especially when Lando's looking over at the RB21 and just then deems it as a pretty damn good car. Alongside him saying that, yeah, his car is good, but he's just not able to click with it properly, then you know that something is afoot and that maybe a balance of power is shifting, and he's not quite sure what to do about it. Because let's not forget, Lando Norris has been the golden boy of McLaren since 2019. Very much the case of Charles Leclerc when he made the promotion up to Ferrari and managed to disrupt the status quo with Sebastian Vettel. And if you want to look at 2019 as well, you can even include George Russell into this equation, albeit a little bit more roundabout with that Williams car. That was a total disaster. We might even be seeing a similar story to George's over at Sauber with Gabriel Bortoleto, but that's for another day. But do like the video if you'd like me to talk about that in the future, because I think Gabi, he deserves some slack. But back to Lando. With him being the bastion of the newly minted McLaren Junior Driver program back in the 2010s, he was enjoying strong support and was the poster child of Zach Brown as he tried to convince the world that his team was not spiraling toward the abyss, which in 2017 they were, painfully so. But yes, Lando partnered with Carlos Sainz, and whilst he was outscored, he held his own. Carl Lando was born, a fan-favourite bromance with friendly banter and mutual respect that lives on to this day. And this came at the right time, just as F1's social media scene really kicked off, and we got the first season of Drive to Survive, so anyone wanted to build a really strong relationship with the audience of Formula 1, and it was growing, oh, Lando came in at the absolute best moment. And then Ricciardo arrived, but it was Norris who stole the show. He outclassed the proven race winner, finishing their first year together 160 points to Daniel's 115. And Ricciardo left the team early as well. Now that would seal Lando's status as McLaren's main man heading into 2023. At this point, he probably felt utterly untouchable, at the peak of his powers. He had become speed, destroyer of worlds. And then in comes Oscar Piastri and goes, Lamal no. Because his arrival changed the dynamic entirely. For the starters, because McLaren really wanted him. Fresh off the Alpine contract scandal, that team pulled out all the stops to sign him. A back-to-back junior champ, Piastri was a cut above previous teammates, and whilst Norris still finished ahead, 205 to 97, Oscar showed flashes of brilliance, including that sprint win in Qatar, as McLaren recovered from another rocky start. Now, to be fair, Norris wasn't really down in the dumps about it. He did acknowledge Oscar's really good debut season, as he said right here, but you might be interested in how well this has aged. Not like milk per se, not like wine, but something palatable and curious. Congrats to him. I think any contract that allows you to be longer in Formula 1 is a great thing. He's talking about that first contract extension, by the way. He's performed, he's done everything he's needed to, and probably, I think, exceeded most people's expectations from what he's been able to achieve already this season. He's pushed me a lot, and it's not a nice thing. It's not what I want. But yeah, he's done a really good job. 25 and 26 for himself is going to be something to look forward to. Oh, that quote hits different now, doesn't it? Even back then, in 2023, Norris realised Piastri wasn't just another teammate to bowl over, he was a real threat. Maybe not then, but soon. And now, yeah, it's happening. Because it's evident right now that Oscar has built a reputation at McLaren for his calm, measured approach and sharp technical understanding. traits that have earned him plenty of respect within the team. And he's also really focused to steady himself, get to grips with this car, and try and close the gap between himself and Lando Norris in the race, and also when it comes to qualifying, which especially this year is vitally important if you want to get ahead. And even though the biggest weakness he had in that first season was tyre management, as made evident especially in Hungary 2023, he did manage to sort out that race pace and tyre management, but then that came at the cost in terms of consistency in qualifying, because we saw plenty of gaffes toward the end of the year, which he does admit became a major problem, and probably made McLaren's time of getting the constructors that little bit harder. I still will not forget that first lap tangle with Max Verstappen in Abu Dhabi. My heart was in my mouth. I was terrified that Oscar may have been partially responsible for them losing the constructors and Ferrari getting it. I don't think he would have gotten that contract extension. Because when you look back at it, Austin and Mexico, they were rough, and Imola, that impeding penalty might have cost him his first pole last year. Even Austria was compromised by track limits, which the team did fight tooth and nail to try and overturn, and I personally think had he not gotten that penalty in terms of track limits, he might have actually gone on to win the Austrian Grand Prix, his first victory, ahead of George Russell. And it's quite clear that during the off-season, Piastri and his team over at McLaren have been working on all of these little inconsistencies to make sure they don't crop up again, especially when McLaren clearly has the best car at this precise moment. And you feel like right now, it's paying off. He's been absolutely flawless. Well, I mean, save for that coming off in Australia, but still, it really stands to reason about his determination to even get it out of the grass and then get back into the points. He's chased away those pitfalls in qualifying as well, an effort that, as he put it, has been paying off. And now he's matching Norris on more pace, and after the first 4 races, the qualifying is head-to-head, with Oscar edging it when you count the sprint qualifying. A clear sign of growth and steady nerves. But just as important, and I think this is increasingly vital, is that Piastri at the same time is not afraid to speak his mind about fairness when it concerns the team, papaya rules, and expecting him to get equal treatment alongside Lando at this precise moment. Because as it's become clear that McLaren is right up there and is in contention, quite a strong favourite for defending their Constructors' title for the first time since the early 90s, that he is expecting equal treatment, much like how Lando would expect equal treatment, making very subtle and quiet references to previous situations where Lando would be getting parts first and then Oscar would get some of the parts, but then all of it the following race. So first dibs would go to the Brit. At the time, fairly understandable, and McLaren were a little bit further down the order, desperate to try and get back to where they wanted to be. You could argue that McLaren were really stretched thin to try and make up the ground they lost in the winter of 2022, when they had to completely change tack after firing James Key, who had missed the mark with the regulations, but nevertheless, it still happened. And right now, Oscar's simply just saying, well, I just hope that these shenanigans don't happen again, right? Raising one quizzical eyebrow. And right now, with McLaren leading the constructors and both the drivers effectively tied at the top of the drivers' standings, that call for parity is all the more important and relevant and true. For anyone who's a Lando fan, Oscar's not whining, he's just following the papaya rules playbook. That's all he's doing. His calm, confident tone puts quiet pressure on McLaren to keep things equal. Norris wears his heart on his sleeve, Piastri stays composed, even brushing off emotional radio chatter with, "The button is there for a reason." He is giving off so much old man energy, it's not even funny. Meanwhile, as we have seen, Norris has never been one to hide his frustration when things don't go his way. Team boss Andrea Stella even remarked that Norris can be overly harsh on himself, especially after tough races. That raw emotion helped make him a fan favourite, and somewhat respected by one Sebastian Vettel, calling him an absolutely great role model. Now, this is all very well and good when McLaren were chasing the front-running pack, having fallen back to the realms of 5th place in 2022, tacking themselves on back again in 2023, and now leading them at the front. The rules have changed, the terms of engagement have changed, so whether or not Lando's mindset and tactics are working right now as they used to just 2 years ago, that remains to be seen. It's not really working as effectively as he would have hoped as of now before the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Because right now, when both of them are leading the championship, this pressure really carries more weight. And then, of course, comments from the past come back to bite him right at the wrong moment when he really does not need them distracting him. And Norris's drive to beat Max Verstappen specifically, his friend and ultimate benchmark, and let's be honest, everyone's benchmark, adds another layer. He's finally ditched the Lando no-wins label with 4 victories last year and, of course, a 5th in Australia. His self-described selfish goal? Win the driver's title. But while Norris looks outward at Max, some believe he's missing the real threat inside the garage. Piastri is closing fast, and if Lando doesn't pivot, he might be caught off guard. And in Japan, when asked about a potential Hamilton-Rosberg-style rivalry with Piastri, Norris did admit that 2025 would have its tougher times, saying, "We want to beat each other, but we're also teammates." Now, even though many people are quick to judge Lando and say, "Oh, he's absolutely failed already," so far, he is handling the situation with a certain decorum, and he is remaining somewhat professional, unless you take the Bahrain Grand Prix qualifying into account, when admittedly, and my wife was watching this at the time, she immediately saw what Lando's face was when he got P6, and she just said, "Oh, Lando does not look happy." And that wasn't me saying that either, because behind the scenes, the pressure surely is building. After years of being the focal point of McLaren's efforts, seeing his younger teammate grab wins and now poles, and pushing for equal footing whilst also remaining collected and rational about it, it's uncharted territory for Norris, him having to deal with the fury of what was going on with Max Verstappen's lot last year. But having said that, Lando really needs to manage his highs and lows if he really wants to try and get ahead in this potential intra-team rivalry, because this might be his undoing. And again, I understand that's just how he rolls. He doesn't seem willing to want to move away from it because it's not true to himself. I do appreciate that authenticity, but he really needs to stop looking at Max Verstappen as the only championship rival he might be later on in the season, as well as many other people, including maybe George Russell, if he remains consistent and the situation over at McLaren gets argy-bargy to the point where they actually make contact, people retire, people crash, they fall down the order. Who knows what may happen this year? Heck, the Ferraris might suddenly be back in the game. So trying to balance all of that, it's going to be a really difficult season for Lando. And as you've been made well aware of, McLaren is treading carefully, almost to the point of paranoia. Stella's saying he believes the duo can work together to do their team-first model justice, and so far, that balance seems to be holding. There have been no strict team orders. Piastri's win in China, with Norris second, unfolded drama-free. I mean, at least not directly, because you could easily argue, with the situation up front, that Norris was overdriving the car to the point where the brakes might have suddenly exploded if he weren't too careful. One more lap could have seen those brakes go boom, and then he completely tumbled down the order. And then with Piastri, you could easily argue with him that he wasn't exactly making Lando's life easy by carrying on pushing and pushing and pushing, not falling back to give Lando a little bit of support and DRS and whatnot. There was some sort of interesting little dance going along that neither one of them was willing to capitulate to the other. And throughout all of that, so far, papaya rules have actually not needed to be enforced, at least according to Lando, back in China. So maybe Lando is trying to take a leaf out of Piastri's playbook and trying to be casual and saying, "Oh, there's no push needed for equal footing. Oh, it's absolutely fine right now," which is good progress, but we need to see more of that. And a big part of this shift comes from Piastri and his manager Mark Webber slowly winning over the team. Piastri's maturity, feedback and tireless work, they have made an impression. Zach Brown crediting him for helping spark McLaren's late 2024 resurgence. And apparently, according to rumours and reports, the terms of his contract are somewhat similar to Lando's, really asserting the idea that right now, both men are indeed equals. And in the case of Lando Norris, that's not great, because McLaren now sees both of the drivers as cornerstones for their future. And this is a really big sea change in their one-driver model. McLaren is actively trying to nurture two title-level drivers, a balancing act that takes diplomacy as much as strategy. For Norris, it means sharing the spotlight he once had to himself, and Piastri, it's validation that he's earned his place at the top. One telling example is how McLaren has adjusted how it rolls car upgrades for this year. That model I mentioned earlier? Well, no more. They are looking to maybe consider simultaneous upgrades, meaning both drivers get upgrades, identical ones, at the same time, even if it does mean they have to delay them a race to make sure that actually does happen. Or, you could easily infer from Stella's comments on that same article that maybe they might give one driver the parts first, and then in another instance of another upgrade package, they give the other driver first dibs. So they would do one and the other, depending on where they are in the championship. It is a subtle but meaningful shift that Piastri is gaining some ground in that potentially he can now have upgrades at the same time as Lando, after having 2 years where he would have to wait his turn, or maybe getting a smattering of upgrades whilst Lando got the full caboodle. But make no mistake, Lando Norris is still the linchpin when it comes to McLaren's public image, but you can sense the mood is changing, that maybe something is going on where Oscar Piastri and his team are slowly but surely dismantling the DNA of McLaren that has been forming for the last 5 years, and I really sense it too, because when I saw them in 2019, they were the underdogs, fighting forever forward with Lando and Carlos there. Last year saw a shift, which I sort of didn't like. This cocky sort of team which did make huge mistakes. It was really not washing well with me. And this year, I'm not really sure as well. I mean, I'm happy that McLaren's finally got there, that Zach Brown and Andrea Stella have come up with the goods, as well as all of the other fine people over at Woking. But the aura right now seems like it's in flux, that McLaren is evolving, and they're not quite sure who to back at the moment, because they certainly can't back one right now. They have to actually handle both. Whether that balance holds under title pressure, that's a whole other caboodle. After all, only one can be world champion. And we've not seen this dynamic going on in McLaren since the days of Jenson Button and Lewis Hamilton in 2010, arguably. That being, in my honest opinion, the last time where both McLaren drivers really had a genuine snifter at the world title, going pretty much all the way to the end. That famous photo of the 5 title chases with Bernie Ecclestone, yeah, that rings true. But yeah, I know you're all probably thinking Fernando and Lewis, but I doubt it would go that far. I really don't want it to go that far. Please don't let it go that far. My brain and mind and heart cannot take it. I will fall off this ladder if that happens. Just so you know, I'm not actually going to do it. Figuratively. And yes, okay, I have flirted with the likes of Mark Webber, not in reality in terms of this video, but I shall go into a little bit more detail because we do need to address a little bit more the grit in the room. The Aussie grit. Piastri credits Webber's steady influence not just for his own growth, but for helping McLaren get back to winning ways. For those people who may complain that Webber's been a destabilising force for Norris, there's a personal echo in all of this that Webber's time at Red Bull was full of success, but also frustration. He played a key role in 4 constructors' titles, but lost out on the drivers' one to Sebastian Vettel, often feeling like the second priority. You get the feeling that maybe Lando has learnt a bit from Mark as well, because in some of the cooldown rooms from this year, you can hear them joking about some of the instances like Multi-21, really trying to stir the pot amongst the media. And I'm quite sure that Webber has regaled them with multiple stories of his antics with Red Bull. But you also reckon that Webber's got this determination to make sure that Piastri has a contract which makes sure that those sort of antics do not happen to him because he had to live through it. He does not want Oscar to fall into the same trap like he did. Oscar saying that Webber makes sure his contracts are what they should be, thinking about the little things. The deal didn't just cement Piastri's place in the team, it also shut the door on external interest, which I am sure have been coming from the likes of Red Bull. Because I can easily imagine, considering how close Mark Webber and Christian Horner are to this day, where Mark still does some demonstration events, most notably recently at the Festival of Speed, that they do sometimes talk about Oscar, whether or not he might be available, whether there's a snifter there, and I'm pretty sure Mark's looking at Christian and just going like, yeah, nah, mate. Because Webber's made sure that his driver stays exactly where he is, with a team that still wants him badly. His role's been nothing but constructive, with no friction between him and Norris's side either. But let's be clear, Webber's focus is Oscar. And when needed to, as we saw with a recent photo, where Mark was indeed having a little bit of an argument with one Zach Brown, he is not afraid to play hardball if he feels like his boy is being questioned. And even though he did help back up McLaren's actions in 2024 somewhat, you feel like, yeah, no, he's not willing to put up with that anymore because now really McLaren are in the pound seat right from the very first race. But I think it is very important to state that so far, you've not heard the likes of Lando really complain about Mark Webber's presence in the same way that some people complain about Jos Verstappen's presence within the garage. So far, Mark has actually been quite respectful toward Norris, and Norris has not really had any bugbears with the likes of the former Red Bull driver. So far, so good. But that could change. For Lando, this year is a double-edged sword, so to thrive in this environment, Norris has to step up both mentally and technically to reaffirm why he's still McLaren's guy. So instead of lamenting the situation or resisting the situation from Piastri's side of the garage, he should maybe just take it on board and learn from it. Just roll with it, accept it that it is a thing, and therefore channel it into your own energy and be able to push forward. All of the greats of the past did just that. When their position in the team was threatened, they elevated themselves. But he must also avoid letting frustration spiral into costly mistakes or tension within the team. Controlling his emotions during close battles with Oscar is essential. Because we did see traces of that, because in Japan he did manage to bounce back from China, where Oscar did rule the roost, by being able to out-qualify Oscar for the Japanese Grand Prix and remain ahead of him. Despite Piastri making a good few goes down into turn 1, he was thinking forward and thinking about the championship instead of trying to do a damn dare move into turn 1 against Max and maybe crashing out akin to maybe in Austria. No, he was thinking ahead, and that's very, very good. Commendable. And as I have touched upon before in this video, Lando needs to just stop thinking that Max is his only rival. He really needs to bring his focus inward. With McLaren now often ahead of Red Bull, Norris must learn how to race from the front, defend smartly, whether the threat comes from someone else other than Verstappen. Because Norris did say he did learn a thing or two that Max taught him to get his elbows out. Now he needs that same grit with Piastri, because right now he's not going to back down, but he's also going to be calmly nice about it, which is a little bit unsettling. And technically, Norris also needs to build himself up on the technical level, because he's had the natural advantage in qualifying for the longest time, for 2 seasons at this point, but now it's starting to erode. He needs to really evolve his qualifying hustle once more, because again, Bahrain, it really slipped away. He managed to gain a little bit of time in his second Q3 push, whereas others managed to gain even more. Even the likes of Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari, and even Gasly. If Piastri managed to find time through different lines or braking techniques, Norris should be open to adapting and make use of those findings, being from the same team, to simply ask what Oscar is doing. There's no shame in doing that. It is becoming clear that something is shifting. Oscar can gel well with the car at the moment, Lando can't so much. They both can find speed, but Oscar's finding stability. Lando really has to hustle that car to get the same effect. So I think Lando will want to do his best to try and look at what Oscar is doing to then make sure that both of them are on an even keel. It's okay to ask, and I'm pretty sure that McLaren would make sure that was compliant, because remember, team first, papaya rules that everybody benefits. But if frustration kicks in, like we have seen in the last couple of races, then he risks losing the narrative and the team's trust. The next few races could define everything, because right now it is starting to do so. Both drivers now are relatively equal in the championship hunt. Piastri's managed to erode a 23-point deficit to now within 3 races since the Australian Grand Prix. That is absolutely huge, and if Piastri had not binned it into that grass, he would be ahead by now. So maybe Lando should just take a leaf out of Williams' book, how Alex has been fired up with the presence of Carlos Sainz, so why not use that same fire to burn brightly with Piastri on the other side of the garage? How a really good driver can then spur on the other driver, instead of Lando constantly resisting, saying, "No, I'm the team leader!" No, you can't do that, because that's not going to work. It's not going to work with the likes of Piastri. It might have worked with Daniel when he arrived, but not with this kid. But I do think as this season rolls along, Norris versus Piastri is McLaren's defining storyline. A high-stakes duel between the season star and the rising force. If McLaren can pull it off and they work harmoniously together, then Zak Brown will have even more ammunition to aim against Christian Horner. It's not just about wins anymore. It's about control, influence, and who leads McLaren going into the second half of the decade. The team must try to balance ambition and harmony, or risk a civil war. Right now, it's game on. But the real test lies ahead, especially after the Spanish Grand Prix, if the flexi wings really nobble the likes of McLaren and everyone else catches up. Can the two drivers keep pushing each other whilst the team's able to keep the peace? If managed right, we could see a situation where we do get the likes of Coulthard and Hakkinen working together harmoniously for many, many years. We could even see a little bit of Prost and Lauda, where it's remained quite feisty, intense, but also respectful, where each of the drivers know their place. However, if not, we could get a Prost versus Senna, where the balance of power is being threatened, one driver feels absolutely hard done by, and then decides to make a speedy exit to another team. But again, with Lando pointing out that the RB21's pretty damn good, he might be trying to line up a Red Bull call, if they're looking for a brand new leader, to maybe go up against Yuki Tsunoda. So yes, this battle at McLaren is not just about points, it's for McLaren's very soul. But touching upon Yuki again, his demeanour could provide Red Bull some sense of calm amidst their numerous storms. To find out why I think Yuki's situation matters more than just results alone, but also how he's actually thinking, watch this video next, straight after this one.